section, lecture 2 of my module on non-destructive evaluation of the human body. If you remember last time I talked about wearable biosensors, and just yesterday the Wall Street Journal ran an article about Apple's smartwatch. So when Apple first talked about their smartwatch, they were talking about all these things that they were going to do with it. They were going to not just measure pulse, like you can get your pulse measured in all types of devices at the gym and things like that. They were going to measure blood pressure, stress levels, O2 sat, that's the saturation of oxygen in your blood. And apparently, sources for this Wall Street Journal writer told them that all those extra things have been dropped from the Apple smartwatch. That basically, it's just going to be doing a pulse, which isn't really that exciting. So the excitement will come from other things, I'm sure, that Apple will have the smartwatch do, but not as a biosensor, not as a measuring vitals. And the reason for their problems is the technology apparently is inconsistent. It's just hard to get good data out of what they're trying to use. They're trying to use skin conductivity to get pulse and stress, and it wasn't really working. And there's also regulatory issues. When you start doing too much with the human body, then you start having the FDA and other agencies starting to ask questions and ask if you should do more research or documentation. So apparently their first iteration of smartwatches comes down. So last time I presented this module on the physical exam, or we're calling it non-destructive evaluation of the human body. It's kind of a new, almost experimental thing. I'm happy to see so many people came back. I was a little worried that only one person would come back. Because that's the interesting thing about this course, you can pick and choose what you want to hear. So I talked about non-destructive evaluation or testing, gave an overview of that both in medicine and for forensic engineering. And I talked about why I think it's useful for you guys to hear what I have to say about doing a physical exam, to watch a physical exam. I didn't ask last time, does anyone have medical training, like EMT, nursing, or anything like that? Just out of curiosity. I had friends when I was an undergrad and grad school, I had friends who were in EMT service at MIT, but they seemed to enjoy it. I never did it. I actually wasn't pre-med when I was here. I decided to go that way. But anyway. And then when I didn't show you last time, as kind of a follow-up to that physical exam video that we watched, it gets documented like this. This is for a normal person. So a doctor will write or dictate a lot of this out. For a complete physical exam, if they want to bill for a complete physical exam, they have to write like 2/3 of those lines probably to get it billed that way. And yes, billing actually drives a lot of the documentation. So there's a lot of things that they're there, but as a physician, you kind of learn a template, and you know like the standard, and then you remember what you end up remembering with each individual patient is how they deviate from that standard. So that's all you really need to remember. I can talk more about that as we go on. So when you're beginning a physical exam or any kind of forensic investigation, what do you do first? What do you think? Something breaks, what do you do first? Or someone says, I hurt, and they ask you for your opinion. What do you think the first thing you should do? What do you think? Yeah? All right, you're getting too far. That's even before all that.
Ask questions.
Yeah, but even before that. What do you think now? The engineers aren't necessarily going to think about this. Trust your gut. What's your first impression? Right? Before you even usually vision is first. It's part of this trust your gut thing. We're not going to talk about vision today. I'll get to that why, because there's something else that comes pretty fast when you see something new or approach something new. But in engineering and other reductionistic fields, we want to quantify everything. Lord Kelvin is like the hero of quantification, right? And if you can't quantify it, then you can't improve it. You know, you can't see how you improve things. You can't keep measuring. You know, that's the nature of the scientific method. The problem with that, I mean, it's great. Reductionism has led to all the innovations that came out of the 1800s up to the 1900s and revolutionized the world, technology, science, and everything. But the problem is that sometimes we miss things. There are things out there that you can't measure, right? Like, you can't really put a number to how much affection someone has for someone else. You know, you can say maybe they like them more today than they did yesterday, but there's not really a number. We can't really measure it very easily. Pain's something that's hard to measure. I don't know if any of you have been to a doctor's office and they ask you, from a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? If you're like me, you get that question, and I just go, that's meaningless. Seriously, after years of medical training, as a patient, when someone asks me that question, I find it completely meaningless. And yet people want to put that number down so that they can track the trends. But as a physician, I've seen patients giving wildly different numbers, given nothing to do with pain, maybe just how they felt that day or how they felt like talking that day. You know, don't talk to me, it's a fuck, you know, it's average. So numbers sometimes are misleading and cause you to not look at the things that can't be measured. And you look at only the things that are measured. The other thing that's important to realize about your first impression is that when you're starting out in whatever field you choose to practice in, I use the word practice for a reason, because it is practice. You have to practice, develop experience. And as you gain the experience, you start finding that your intuition grows. You start finding that you walk into a situation and you go, I know what's going on. I don't have to go do all these tests. The neophyte attitude when they go into an unknown situation is to order all the tests that they're familiar with. You know, so if something's broken, let's get into the SEM. Let's take it over the TEM for crying out loud somehow. Let's like send it off for FTIR or whatever. Just do all these tests. Whereas someone that has a lot more experience, like say Professor Eager, he walks in and he says, "Okay, just give me the hardness test, and that's all I need," because that answers the question that I think is pertinent. So experience allows you to determine what the pertinent questions are instead of asking a whole barrage of questions. Does that mean when you're starting out that you shouldn't be ordering all this test? Well, that's part of the learning experience. So, when you're starting out, listen to your gut. Listen to think about the first impression that you have, but then order all the tests that you're going to order anyway, because you're not sure about what's going on. As you grow in experience, you'll be able to trust that sense more. So that's called the general impression, and that's something that's actually written in the first line or second line after the vitals of the physical exam. Patient comes into the room, and you say to yourself, this person looks well groomed, they're taking care of themselves, they look kind of healthy. That's just my first impression. But what if your impression is that they're really sick, that they could be dying? You want to say that, you know, and you might want to do something about it before you go and look at their toe fungus that they came in to complain about. I had a patient come in, and he and his wife were just saying that he was really thirsty. That was really the right way. Like, well, things going okay? Oh, yeah, just kind of thirsty. The guy looked sick, really, really sick. And I'll talk more about why he was glowing yellow, but he was also kind of glowing yellow. And he looked sick enough that we all thought that he was not going to make it. And we got him admitted to the hospital, and he died of multi-organ failure 2 days later. It wasn't that much of a surprise. We knew he had metastatic cancer. We knew his wife was pregnant, but just a week before that, he did not look that sick. So that's the other thing with your general impression is you have to kind of pay attention to, you have to see things on a regular basis sometimes to see trends like that that you can't otherwise measure. about vision a little bit, but I'm going to give you a hint. I don't think vision is the answer to my next question. After just the general impression, besides that, what of all the senses, and there's actually not really just 5 senses, but we don't need to really talk about the ones besides the 5 typical senses. What of the 5 senses do you think you notice first in a kind of a striking scenario? Even before you see the situation, sometimes you notice something else. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I have had patients where I smelled them like doors down the hallway. Like everyone on the floor knew that that patient was in their room, and they knew what was wrong with the patient because of how they smell. You go into a failure analysis. For example, in New England, there's a lot of heating oil tanks, right? Because that's how a lot of people heat their houses. They have a tank of oil, and that's what they burn. And it's often a problem that one of those tanks crack. You have this nasty New England environment where there's salt from the ocean, you got fluctuations of temperature through the seasons, and so these cracks sometimes lead. And then the other thing is a lot of parts of New England are very sandy, so oil gets down in the sand, it makes a huge remediation project, right? Well, what do you think the first thing you notice when you walk up to that case? You smell the oil, right? So there's different things that you can notice just from smell. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about smell, odor. So real quick, what you smell comes from volatile chemicals in the air. It's part in the air, some kind of concentration in the air. Goes up into the nasal cavity, goes to the top part of it. You've got mucus lining your nasal cavity, and it's flowing. It's kind of it's more or less replaced every 10 minutes. So that's why you're always kind of swallowing or spitting or something like that, right? There's always a little bit of mucus being turned over. And the reason for that is if it wasn't being turned over, you'd have a lot of junk build up in it, right? Because you're always inhaling stuff. There's debris in the air that you can't see. Sometimes debris in the air that you can't see. So that mucus needs to be turned over. Whatever is in the air dissolves in the mucus. There's a diffusion gradient to the epithelial cells, which I don't have in that picture, but the lining, the actual skin lining of the nasal cavity behind the mucus. And then there are nerve endings there. And so if the nerve endings match up with the chemical in just the right shape, that sends a signal up the neuron through the bone, which is called the cribriform plate, up into the brain. And we call it the olfactory nerve, but a lot of people in medicine say it's actually more of an extension of the brain. So it's not quite so much a nerve there, it's actually kind of like a projection of the brain. And that's how important smell is. Because women, younger people, and non-smokers smell better, or they are able to have better sense of smell. There is a correlation with people with dementia, losing smell. It's often one of the first signs of dementia. There's a story I was taught when I was in med school of a patient came in complaining that all of his meals tasted horrible now. And they were starting to work him up for dementia because they thought his sense of smell and taste are really closely correlated, work together. They thought maybe he was losing his sense of smell and he had some dementia of some sort. And they never really found anything wrong. He was sharp in his attacks, his memory was great. And then finally his physician thought that was the guy's wife, who did all the meal preparation. It turned out she was developing dementia. And so all her food wasn't tasting right to her husband because she couldn't taste how it tasted. So, anyway, that's an aside. You'll see that all of us, Tom, me, Simone, Steve Lyons, these lectures are kind of more of the world according to us. So this is the world according to me, so these candidates. That's part of sharing the experience that I have to you so that maybe you can jumpstart ahead in the pathway experience. So think about when you're smelling something, how you would describe it. Don't just say bad or good or I liked it, I disliked it. Think of how you would describe it. This is a table actually from a document from New Zealand. Some governmental council in New Zealand came up with a document on how to investigate odor complaints. And so they just have a list of adjectives and had them kind of ranked from pleasant to noxious smells. But if you do have problems thinking about some smells, if you ever have a problem describing how something smells, pull out your smartphone and Google around and find adjectives. Because the more descriptive you are, you can't measure something. You need to be descriptive, okay? So odorants, those are the volatile chemicals or compounds that go in your nose. They're usually organics. There's some exceptions to that, hydrogen disulfide, ammonia, but usually organics. They're usually smaller molecules. You think about it, they have to be volatile. They have to be able to diffuse readily through your mucus layer. Big particles aren't really going to do all that. They're not going to make such a strong scent. Esters are the ones that you probably learned about in high school chemistry. The airplane glue. I don't know if you made, like, did a chemical reaction with airplane glue or something like that in school. I seem to remember doing that. But there's an acetone smell. Nail polish remover, that smell is there. But that chemical is found in fruits like bananas or strawberries, pineapple. So people tend to describe it, acetone sometimes as a fruity smell. Terpenes are derivatives from turpentine. Often bugs or trees have terpenes in them to make them less tasty to predators. But you can find more pleasant terpenes in lemons or basil. You also have some cyclic terpenes. They give odor to oranges, camphor, hops, so I like juniper. There's other aromatics, you know, all the spices. They're really good spices there. You have amines. So amines are first, those other slides, those are nice smells. The amines tend to be less pleasant. So pyridine gives like a fishy smell. And they actually add denatured alcohol so that, say, an undergraduate party doesn't get some denatured alcohol in their drink. But it's not worse. There's a guy back, I forget what game it was, but he found the amines that cause the odor to rotting flesh. So as amino acids break down, there's certain byproducts that are volatile, and we smell those, and that gives the odor that is very repulsive to us. Evolutionary pressure probably causes us to find that repulsive. If you repulsed by that smell. You also find some of those called cadaverine putrescence, or two of them. You find some of those in urine or sometimes in people's bad breath. Like if people who don't brush their teeth, they've got essentially decaying material in the mouth and the amino acids break it down and making that smell. Skatole is what gives species one of its strong odors. But in low concentrations, you find it in jasmine. So sometimes smell is dependent on the concentration of what you're smelling. So alcohols, you get cut grass smell, strawberries also have an alcohol that gives them a smell. Menthol is alcohol. Aldehydes. Yeah.
Where does the concentration dependence come from? Is it binding the same receptors and it's just more of it, or are you binding to different receptors
because
you have
over
a
that.
higher concentration?
So there's some debate about how things bind, the combinations of how they bind, and the interpretation thereof by the brain. So there's a lot of pattern matching that the brain does, and you'll read that although we have potential for lots of receptors, when they look at the numbers, there's fewer matches than what they might predict that we can do. And so it seems that the variety of odors that we can distinguish, which actually is pretty large. I mean, yeah, a dog has 100 times that ability, and a lot of that's just because they have a lot more neurons. But a lot of our ability comes from the combinations. So the odorants that I'm listing are kind of like one compound makes this one scent. But in reality, what we experience with all the day-to-day smells, we're smelling lots of odorants together in combination. It's that mixture that causes us to have some kind of reaction in our brain. And whether that's happening at the chemoreceptor site or happening at the brain or some kind of combination, I think there's a little bit of discussion about. And it's frankly beyond my expertise to really opine about. But, yeah, to answer your question?
Yeah.
So you have aldehydes. Aldehydes often are pretty strong. And this is a concentration dependent. So formaldehyde is very noticeable, right? I hated gross anatomy just because of formaldehyde. I just can't stand that smell. It's really bothering me. But malt, the taste in beer and some malted milk, that's an aldehyde, but it's usually in a lower concentration. Ketones, I'll talk a little bit more about ketones, but they kind of have a wide range of smells. Like the smell of fresh bread or basmati rice is mostly a ketone. The smell of fresh blood or scabbing up blood, there's kind of a smell of that. Kind of metallic smell sometimes, people describe it. That's a ketone. Lactones, there's a really interesting lactone. Most of the ones I read about have to do with coconut for some reason, but there's one called solitone, which is gives us curry its flavor, or is part of the curry flavor. Curry is a pretty complex flavor. It's part of the scent that curry has when it's in high concentrations. In lower concentrations, sodalone gives has a maple syrup smell, or a burnt sugar or caramel smell. Yeah.
So we say metallic smells, but like how do they actually get into our nose? It's not metal particles, right, that get into our nose?
No, that's our interpretation.
What do we interpret this? So like we need to get something to interpret, right?
So a lot of the way we describe things aren't necessarily exactly what we're smelling. So that's what I'm using, like, the descriptions of the smells are what people generally describe these things, not that it's literally coming from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but like why is it that sometimes with iron or rust you actually do get the smell of blood?
Blood?
Blood, yeah.
There's iron in blood. But
So how do you smell the iron in the
why.
blood though? That's
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
okay.
Why we when we smell blood, we think there's kind of a metallic scent to it.
Right.
I think it's part of what I was explaining before about how the brain interprets all these different chemicals coming together. There's not just one homogeneous, like it's not just like one chemical coming together. You get hundreds or thousands coming in together, making this kind of symphony of signal coming to the brain, and the brain's interpreting and come up with a word to explain it.
Go back to your doctoral thesis. You worked on welding fume. Welding fume is not metal, it's metal oxide.
Yeah.
And so, once you smell in blood and stuff, this is the taste or the smell of metal oxides, okay?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly if that's that. I don't know that.
When you get very finely divided, very few things are metals, they burn up in the air.
Yeah. You still need to dissolve the mucus layer to get to the nerve.
Well, that's true, but I mean, all I'm saying is the chemistry of this is you should think of oxides rather than metals.
Right. But what I'm saying is it may not be actually metal ions getting to the nerve endings that cause us to be metal. It could be something else that's we've associated.
Okay.
So I don't really know the answer to your question ultimately. Thiols or mercaptans, the cabbage or rotten egg smell. That's part of what gives flatus its distinctive odor. They add these chemicals to propane or natural gas, because propane and natural gas don't have an odor, right? So we want to be able to detect it. So, and these thiols are very noticeable at very low concentrations, so you don't have to add a lot to propane to make it so people smell that there's a propane leak. Usually they're pretty noxious, but grapefruit actually its odor comes from a mercaptan. So again, it's pretty complex. It's kind of hard to predict sometimes, just based on chemistry, how we respond to it as a biological organism. So let's talk about pathological odors that mean something to me as a physician. And I'm not going to talk much about hygiene or perfumes or food smells, because you all know about that. Things that are pathologically interesting to me, I've grouped in how breath smells, infections, organ failure, excretion, and then there's a number of toxins that will cause, in the pathological process, they will cause an odor in the person. So first, breath. Let's talk about halitosis, bad breath. So there's 3 basic causes for just everyday run-of-the-mill bad breath. Decreased saliva, you're not rinsing things out in your mouth, okay? I mean, I'm talking about besides hygiene. Obviously, if you're leaving food debris in there, that makes it worse. But if you have a dry mouth, bacteria starts growing, and that starts creating more smells because they're breaking down the amino acids. If you have acid reflux, that causes a smell coming up from your stomach. The acid's coming back. It's coming up past the sphincter, back up your throat. Postnasal drip. So all that mucus that is floating back in the sinus, your nasal cavity, it's doing its job, but sometimes you get a little more, sometimes there's more buildup because you have a little bit of allergic reaction to your environment. You might have a virus going around or something like that, so you have more. And that's draining the back of your throat, and it's kind of sitting back there, and it's breaking down and causing more odor. So how do you deal with these things? Well, with decreased saliva, there's different things that can decrease the saliva that you can sometimes deal with, sometimes not. Sometimes, like, everyone gets older. As you get older, you tend to salivate less. But you can deal with that by rinsing your mouth off. Just rinse your mouth out a lot. I wouldn't necessarily use an alcohol-based rinse, but you know, water would be fine. Brush your teeth off, get the stuff out, and keep rinsing debris and bacteria out. Postnasal drip, very easy thing. You know what a neti pot is? Anyone know what that is? You know, neti pot. So you're just rinsing, you're pouring water in one nostril, letting it drain through your nasal cavity, out the other nostril, and that's just kind of rinsing out some of that mucus, some of the old mucus. And it's pretty harmless. One caveat, use disinfected water. In some parts of the United States, there is an amoeba in the tap water that can actually go up the olfactory nerve into your brain. You don't want that to happen. So I say it's harmless. I mean, benign neti pots, but that is one thing that, it's only been like 1 or 2 cases in the United States in like, I think, the last decade, but still, awesome. If you have acid reflux, eat less fat, lose weight. Other than that, you need to see a doctor, right? That's beyond what kind of recommendation might give to the public. So anyway, people care about bad breath. One interesting source of a breath odor is ketosis or ketoacidosis. So when your body is in a fasting state, whether it's because you're eating less calories or if you're doing a low-carb diet, which is low-carb diets are not just eating less muffins or something like that. It's actually restricting your diet to pretty low amounts of carbs, like less than like 25 grams, I think. Don't quote me on that, but it's a pretty small amount of carbs. It doesn't really do much for you, in my opinion, to just cut out some of the carbs. Because the big benefit that Dr. Atkins and other people that promote the low-carb diet is they want you to get into this state called ketosis. Ketosis is when you don't have enough carbs in your blood, or carbs coming into your body to create glucose in your blood to feed your brain. The brain is the most important organ for glucose management. And so what your body does is say, oh, I'm not getting enough glucose, let's switch fuel source. Let's start making ketones. So it starts breaking down some of the fats in your body to make these ketones. And we talked about how ketones are an odorant. And so this particular ketones that your body makes, smells kind of more like acetone than it does the other ketones I talked about. So it smells kind of fruity. So if someone goes into ketosis because they're on a low-carb diet, like a real low-carb diet, or because they've been starving, which actually it's hard for most people to do, because it's like 3 days without eating or something like that, before you actually do it, more like 3 to 5. And the breath starts smelling fruity. It's possible. I've done it to myself. It's not that hard to do it when you're doing a low-carb diet. You just have to count your carbs. A more extreme, simplify it, a more extreme version of ketosis is called ketoacidosis, where you get so many ketones in your blood, it starts acidifying your blood. And the reason that happens is usually it's diabetics, or sometimes you can see it in alcoholics, like long-term alcoholics. And in those cases, the breath is very noticeable. Like you notice it outside the room. It's not just when you're standing up close to the person. And it's a life-threatening situation, acidosis. Infections. So you know the rotten flesh smell. We talked about that a little bit. The breaking down of amino acids, making these amines and so forth. Bacteria making sulfides. You can get it from dental or oral infections. You can have a certain lung infection that turns people's breath really bad smell. It smells like something's dying in their lung. That's exactly what's happening. Any cavity in your body, if you stick something in it, you're creating a place for bacteria to live. If you don't take that out, with some exceptions, you're asking for problems. Okay, so temporary is fine, but like if you leave it in, like a kid who like jams a penny up his nose, and it's yeah, penny would do it. That can cause major problems. It doesn't tell us parents. The kid may not be able to like describe what happened. May not even feel it for a while, and then all of a sudden they start crying. The parent doesn't know why. Take them to ER, and the doctor looks in and says, you know, there's a penny up there that's like got bacteria and stuff. It happens. Soft tissue wounds obviously can get infected. Scurvy. Who knows what scurvy is? What is it? Right. So they describe it as smelling putrid. They don't really have an infection. It's just there's soft tissues falling apart. Because vitamin C is important in collagen synthesis. And when you don't have enough vitamin C, the collagen doesn't form right, and it's kind of weak. It just kind of starts falling apart. So your teeth fall out, and your skin gets all nasty. Diphtheria. You know your tetanus shot that you're supposed to get boosters throughout your life every 10 years? Well, nowadays, it's not just tetanus. Because it used to be you'd get a diphtheria and pertussis shot when you were a kid, and then they'd boost it like once or twice, and then they'd be done with it. Nowadays, they've got it combined in with your tetanus shot because they've been finding that adults are giving kids diphtheria. So the recommendation is that you get a diphtheria shot every 10 years along with your tetanus shot. And you won't even know this because you're getting your tetanus shot anyway. It's just part of it. But what diphtheria is cause swelling for usually some children. Adults don't really get it this severe, so a lot of times adults are carriers, and they give it to kids, and the kids are the ones that are suffering. Adults doesn't know. Kids' throat swells up, can't breathe through your throat because it's tight. So we'll talk a little bit about passageways and cross-sectional area and flow when we talk about blood flow and listening to blood flow. But just a small change in the diameter of passageway can restrict flow enormously. We'll talk about that later. So diphtheria is a pretty serious thing for kids. And they say it kind of has a sweet spot. I've not seen that. And I've definitely not seen scrofula. Scrofula is tuberculosis in the lymph nodes, basically. So we don't really see this very often in this country. In India, Indian doctors, they're familiar with tuberculosis. And outside the United States, doctors are familiar with typhoid, which smells like fresh breath, which again, I've never smelled. This I have smelled. So organ failure, specifically liver and kidney failure. The liver processes ammonia. If your liver's not working, you start building up ammonia in your blood. And it's one of the reasons why people think that people with liver failure kind of go crazy, because ammonia gets in the brain. It's part of they start going nuts. Called hepatic encephalopathy. But it also contributes to the breakdown, contributes to metabolite formations that smell. They have this fishy, kind of dead fish kind of smell. And it just permeates the whole ward in the hospital sometimes. Liver failure is not the way to go out, my friends. Do everything you can to avoid liver failure. Because the liver makes all the proteins in your body. And proteins is what holds water in your blood. Because water, like everything else, will follow a concentration gradient. And because your structural materials of your body are proteins, if your blood's going to go flowing through it, it's got to have proteins too. Otherwise, the water will go where the lowest concentration is. It will go back into the proteins of your body. like the structural parts, the extravascular space. And so albumin is one of the main ones. There's a few other proteins the liver makes that are important for blood. Liver stops making those proteins, you don't have enough proteins in your blood, the water starts leaving your blood, going into your extravascular space, like into your abdominal cavity. You get swollen like that. Very uncomfortable. Talk a little bit about the color in another lecture. Kidney failure, it processes urea, which in of itself has an odor. But so both of those patients can have a distinct odor. You know, obviously, we talked about blood. The old blood, to me, has a slightly different smell, a more distasteful smell, actually. And when bacteria starts going crazy once the person dies, so you have all those bacteria in your gut, and once you die, like the good bacteria aren't really supported anymore, and so the bad bacteria start going nuts. They start eating everything and start making lots of smell. So my first experience with a dead body was before I went to med school. I went to the Boston medical examiner's office. A friend of mine, his girlfriend worked there, and they got me in. And the pathologist was really cool about it. And so he's like, come over here. He's like, here, you can do the first cut. And I'm like, standing next to this cadaver. I've never touched a cadaver before in my life. And I start cutting, and my vision starts going, and I'm like, I need to sit down. It was a little bit overwhelming. And I just remember the odor when I was in that abdominal cavity. It's one of the most distinctive odors I've ever smelled. I've not smelled it since because I've not been to the cadavers I've been around since have been preserved. Haven't rushed back to an autopsy lab. But very distinctive odor. Feces actually isn't that interesting to a doctor. Patients sometimes go, doctor, my feces just smell really bad. And I'm like, that doesn't really mean much to me. Feces smells bad in general. There is a couple cases where I do think, and I haven't looked up any kind of clinical evidence for this, but just from the experience of our nursing staff that I've worked with, they would claim that they could smell when people have blood in their stool, they would claim that it smelled different. That it was a very noxious odor that they could smell. And also, there's a certain bacteria that, if you get antibiotics, it kills off other bacteria in your gut, and this bacteria, which is native to your gut, then doesn't have any competitors, so it grows out of control. It's called C. difficile and causes diarrhea. That one I think is less likely that there's a distinctive smell that you could correlate consistently, but both of those I've heard nurses claim they smell different. Urine. So if you come into a room and it smells like urine, first you start thinking, well, this person may be incontinent, and that could be an issue. Often it's a symptom of a bigger issue. Often it's just, maybe it's because they are intoxicated or something. But urine's often a noticeable smell. Urine smells stronger if the person is dehydrated, because the urine is more concentrated, more smell. As an aside, does anyone know what the word insipid means? If I said that artist is so insipid, or what he does is insipid. What's that? Yeah, it means tasteless. So when we talk about that, we're kind of like using it as a kind of derogatory, like, oh, that's tasteless art. It literally means tasteless without taste. That's what it came from Latin. Insipid, taste or something like that. It means so that means diabetes, insipidus. Diabetes comes from a Greek word meaning siphon. So what they were saying, and then melodus. Mel is Latin for honey, so sweet. So there was a time when doctors were trained to taste urine to see if the person who was complaining of peeing a lot. So if someone's urinating a lot, that's what the siphon means. It's just like they're just pouring the urine out. And when you have bad diabetes insipidus or diabetes mellitus, urine is just dumping out. Like there's a lot of urine. It's very noticeable to some people. So they come to the doctor and say, I'm peeing a lot. And the doctor goes, okay, you have insipidus, you have mellitus. Mellitus tastes sweet because the reason they're peeing a lot is because water is following the concentration gradient. There's lots of sugar in your urine because you got a lot of sugar in your blood, and water's falling. That's why you're peeing a lot with diabetes and mellitus. A little more complicated with diabetes insipidus. Has to do with sodium. But it's not quite a smell thing, but it's a taste thing. And then there's some genetic disorders that we test kids for. Have you ever seen this on soda bottles? Ketogurics contains phenylalanine. You ever see that and wonder what that was? It's a genetic disorder where they can't process phenylalanine. It builds up in their body and causes problems. Makes their urine smell musty or stale. There's a disease that is originally, creatively called maple syrup urine disease. When they don't process branch change of amino acids and a couple others. They're genetic things where the amino acids just don't get processed. Toxins. So this is a little more interesting. First, the common ones of recreational intoxication. You have alcohol, you have tobacco and cannabis. You can smell those things. Isopropyl alcohol sometimes is abused, and it's not good. Ethylene glycol is abused, but it doesn't have an odor, so it's something to distinguish someone's acting drunk, but you can't smell that acetone fruity smell or about them. So maybe it's antifreeze if they drink, which is not good. Amyl nitrate is an inhalant that sometimes people puff, and it gives them that same kind of smell to their breath. There's a really old, has anyone ever heard of Jelly Bellies? Yeah? I don't think they're that common anymore. If you know that they are, then maybe you should talk to someone. No, okay. But they have this, they're reported to have this really distinctive pungent odor to them. There's other sedatives that are less commonly used recreationally, used anyway for sedation. Chloroform, kind of can smell kind of like that free smell. More pungent or acrid odor comes from formaldehyde, which is still used, and it's particularly strong because it's a third of it's metabolized in the lungs, so the metabolite goes right out the breath when you smell it. Chlorohydrite is the chemical that Mickey Finn, some bartender I think, gave to slipping someone a Mickey, which is a drug to drink and knock them out. I kind of suspect that that term may evolve a little bit with a recent popular entertainer, but not with chlorohydrate, because that's not so common anymore. So toxins that you might see at home. Carbon monoxide is odorless, right? But if someone is brought into the ER and have other stigmata of like carbon monoxide poisoning, and they happen to smell like exhaust, then it's kind of a clue. Creosote is more like something that you'd see on a farm, like on a fence post. But phenol is common. We'll talk about that. Camphor, I don't have a spot of camphor. Camphor is what's in mothballs. Very distinctive. Sometimes people use it to clear sinuses. We got a story about that. So phenol is carbolic acid. Came from coal tar, which was a source for lots of chemicals like Tylenol. Tylenol still, or was, I think there's synthetic routes, but was made from coal tar. But Dr. Joseph Lister, you ever hear of Listerine? That's where it came from. Dr. Joseph Lister is like the founder of antiseptic procedure. So he started using this carbolic acid, this recent derivative from coal tar, and discovered that wounds would heal better. Although he also discovered if you use too much of it, the wounds would burn, and that's why it's kind of toxic. But it has this smells sweet and tarry. You can find it in chloroseptic spray or Carmex in low concentrations. So obviously, Lister used it, it's in these things. Low concentrations, low doses are fine. High doses, you can actually get them to burn. Nitrobenzene smells kind of almondy, or it's more of a pleasant smell. I guess it kind of combines well with solvents and other things that may smell less pleasant. So they put it in shoe polish to make a shoe polish smell. So that shoe polish smell, that comes from nitrobenzene. Methyl salicylate is the wintergreen smell, right? The thing is, though, that additive is pretty toxic by weight. So just one teaspoon of this is, if you ate a teaspoon of this, it'd be the equivalent of downing 23 full-size apples. So, so that wintergreen, this wintergreen scent is actually what's in Bengay and other kind of topical oils that has that distinctive odor. And it is possible to hurt yourself. There was a runner in 2007 that apparently OD'd on topical analgesic. This is kind of random that I found. Someone comes in smelling like carrots, and they're all and they're sick. It might have been because they ate this water hemlock. It's actually fairly common in the United States. I wouldn't know how to identify it until I learned about it. Right. So industrial odorants, or smells, industrial toxins that can cause a person to have an odor of alcohol. The rotten egg smell comes from hydrogen sulfide. That comes back out the person after they've been exposed to it. Or captains do the same thing. You can get a rotten egg smell if someone's taking a pill. This is a side disulfiram is used for alcoholics. It makes alcohol, it makes you nauseated if you drink alcohol. So hopefully it helps an alcohol kick the habit. If they get nauseated every time they drink alcohol, we kind of make them smell it. There's rotten eggs around. Cyanide is classically described as causing the person to have an odor of bitter almonds. Cyanide poisoning. You see cyanide in gold and silver mining sometimes. You can get it when there's polyurethane or vinyl burning, like in a house fire. So it's not just for like spy movies. It's someone lighting a capsule and making stuff, killing some of the cyanide poison. You can actually find it in real life sometimes. It binds up with mitochondria, an enzyme in the mitochondria, and stops aerobic respiration, aerobic metabolism. So your body's completely without energy, it basically starts shutting down and dies like that. And so, and then turpentine. I just learned this in preparation for this. Fascinating. It can make your urine smell like violence. And this is something that's been known for a long time. The products of metabolism are first instance those of muscular tissues, which perform mechanical work, right? So there's a means of breaking down, and that's in part why urine kind of has some of the odor it does. These amines break down to make these amino acids break down to make these amines. And so even it says, therefore hardly to be wondered at the smell of urine when no food is taken that might influence it. It is rather like bouillon, even if no meat is been eaten. So I've never thought of urine and bouillon smells the same, but that's what this person thought. If, for example, small traces of oil of turpentine are swallowed or even inhaled, urine will assume a pleasant odor of violence. Apparently, the ladies of Rome did it, according to this author. He also took belladonna nightshade, which is nowadays we synthesize it called atropine, which is a drug that would make their eyes look big. And that's from a book by Dr. Rutgers of Germany in 1940 on the ideal sex life. No lie. So anyway. The garlic odor is a very interesting odor because there's three different things that can make someone have a garlic odor about them. And it tends to be more than just their breath. It actually kind of comes out of the body. So cholinesterase inhibitors, they affect your parasympathetic system and it makes you very sick. It's a component of nerve gas. So anyone see The Rock with Nick Cage? It's kind of an older movie, I guess, but there's a scene, there's sarin gas, and he like stabs himself with a shot to cure him. He's stabbing himself with atropine, supposedly, to reverse it, and that's the chemical that's derived from belladonna. Dimethyl suboxide is a top way analgesic. It's pretty benign, but it goes right through the skin, and it can come back out again. It has a kind of a garlicky scent. Tellurium can give you garlic breath, but it's not very toxic. Arsenic, thallium, and selenium in high doses. Low dose selenium, okay. High dose selenium, not good. They can cause, if it doesn't kill you, arsenic and thallium can kill you. But if they don't kill you, it can cause a lot of gastrointestinal distress, cause hair and nail problems, cause you to have fatigue and irritability, and neuropathy. So the nerve endings, peripheral neuropathy, ends of your fingers and toes can start giving you problems. And that was a big epidemic in Bangladesh. I don't know if anyone knows much about South Asia in the late 80s, but there was a big flooding in Bangladesh. It screwed up the river delta or something like that. So all this flooding came through, and it flooded out it caused problems for their water supplies, and there's a lot of arsenic in it. So there's a lot of people starting to have what's called black foot disease. When I was a medical student, black foot disease is because the nerve endings would start dying at the feet. So after the nerve endings died, the feet would start dying. When I was a medical student, I saw a patient that had a very strong garlic odor, and when I was in the ER, it was in Logan County, Ohio, right over here. And these are the percentage of ground wells in that area that have arsenic concentrations that are kind of unsafe. So it's actually a region where it's a possibility. But when I was in the room with her, I was thinking, why does this sound familiar to me? She's got gastrointestinal distress, a garlicky odor to her. She's kind of like emotionally like agitated, like irritable. And later, after she left, I realized, oh, I could have been arsenic poisoning, because I learned about arsenic poisoning when I was doing my PhD. And so I called the ER doctor and I was like, hey doc, I think that might have been arsenic poisoning. But I think more likely it was probably me myself. But, so okay, real quick, to end up. Let's pretend that you're the doctor. So someone comes in, smells like vinyl, confused and sleepy. What do you think it is? We talked about it. Jelly bellies. So this guy's having a heart attack. It smells like almonds. Tired. Nowadays, you give him special form of vitamin B12 actually to help bind up the cyanide, get out of the system. This guy comes in, he was gargling with some germicide. He didn't really know what it was. He has all these burns. It smells kind of like gander shampoo. So phenol, that carbolic acid comes from coal tar. Gander shampoos are often made from coal tar. So you know that smell, you ever smell that gander shampoo smell? That's the smell. Pull this engineer out of the sewer. He's comatose, he's in a coma, smells like rotten eggs. As an aside, we find some copper wiring in his pocket, it's all corroded. What do you think he was exposed to? Yeah. So I stole this question from a paper, a little bit older paper, and I changed the question from pennies to wiring. Why? Right. They're basically, yeah, 1982 is when they changed it. Farmer comes in, can't breathe well, he's just drooling out of the mouth, he's vomiting, he's got like pinpoint pupils, smells like garlic, but he's not a garlic farmer. Big cage. Yeah, the cholinesterase inhibitor, it's used as a pesticide. So, this is a lifesaver being fresh. I thought it was a cool picture. Kid comes in smelling like lifesavers. I agree. That's that methyl salicylic. Salicylic. This one's a little bit. This is not fair because we didn't really talk about it a lot. But kid's burned up his throat. It smells like Windex. What do you think he drank? Windex. But what's Windex? Ammonia? You don't want to drink ammonia. What if someone comes in smelling like clothes from grandma's closet? All right, so challenge for engineers is to find a way to replicate what humans can do with their nose. So there's people working on electronic noses, gas chromatography coupled with mass spectrometry. It's like a traditional way to kind of replicate what humans can do with their nose. But there's new ways like nano arrays where you can come up with all these different like transducers and a micro nano size, so you can put a whole bunch of them, so that each one detects just one chemical, but then you can detect hundreds of thousands of chemicals all at once. That's new novel ways to create electronic noses. There's a couple chemicals that we don't really smell with the nose that are starting to be established to be related with disease, like ethylene pentane, or related to oxidative stress in the body. Isoprene has been correlated with cystic fibrosis. And even what's more interesting is sometimes there's some cancers, and schizophrenia even is starting to be correlated with some chemicals that they can detect in the air. We know that dogs have much stronger noses, so as an aside, there are some trials showing that dogs are detecting some cancers. But the big thing is the electric nose, something that perhaps some of you may work on someday. So, summary. Even Apple struggles with biosensors. It's a challenge. There's people that are interested. It's a challenge. Trust your gut in your first impressions. Note the odors that you smell in any kind of forensic investigation when trying to figure out what's going on. Think about descriptive ways to characterize them. rinse your mouth out, rinse your mouth out a lot. And next time we'll talk about color in the visual exam. Thanks. Questions?